have a huge problem. This is my Space Marine collection, and it is my hobby shame. There is over 2,000 points of Space Marines here. I never thought I'd get here, but this is over $500 to $600 worth of Space Marines. Even more than that now, since I added the Leviathan box. And they're all unpainted. It's embarrassing at this stage. They've been sitting on my shelf for way too long. And now that the new 10th edition of Warhammer is here, it is the perfect time to get them painted. But one problem. I've just been putting off painting them because I can't decide how to paint my Space Marines. Space Marines have lots of different chapters, all with different color schemes, and I know that there are people who love them. There are fans of Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, etc, etc, and I get that there's a lot of appreciation for the big, bold, saturated schemes that those chapters use. But they're not me. I love Warhammer 40k for the grim dark. And a lot of the Space Marine models that I own are the newer Primaris Space Marine style. They look great in terms of the sizing, but they feel a lot more tactical, modern, military inspired, like they're out of Call of Duty, rather than the grim dark of old that I adore. My joy of Warhammer 40k was inspired by a lot of the classic Blanche artwork, where everything was awful all of the time and everybody had a weird face. Also, these masks were everywhere. So I don't know how I'm going to paint these models, so I've just been putting it off. But I've come up with a little bit of an idea for these Space Marines, and maybe if you're somebody who's intimidated by painting or feels like they're not good enough, maybe this video will help you see what's possible with just a little bit of imagination and very little skill. So I don't want to paint all of my Space Marines all at once with this new scheme in case I end up not liking it, but luckily 10th edition Warhammer 40k has a new combat patrol mode that I'm kind of in love with, and I have a game of that scheduled for tomorrow, so I thought, why not kill two birds, one stone? I'm going to paint a combat patrol, and I'm going to fix the Space Marine Grimdark problem all at once. This is the Black Templar Combat Patrol. This is a portion of my army. No, I'm not painting Black Templars. I'm gonna be painting these Space Marines as my very own homebrew custom lore chapter, the Iron Sovereigns. I'm designing them as a spin-off of the Black Templar, and because I love Grimdark, my chapter are going to be made up of the Space Marines that were too extreme for the notoriously very extreme Black Templar. Yeah, these guys are kind of intense. Now, I don't have a lot of time to paint these. I need to get these done for like tomorrow, but I kind of want to get them done in a couple hours, so we're gonna have to be fast here. Luckily, I do think we can make it. There's only what, like 17 miniatures here? So the first thing we've got to do when we're painting a new color scheme or an army is figure out, how do we start? And I love to go back to basics and think about the core concept of the army. So what do I think of when I think of Space Marines? Well, I think of knights in space with a thuggish, oppressive attitude. I think of boots slamming into people's faces. And I get this vibe from all the heraldry, the swords, the tabards, and of course, all of the glorious Blanche art. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is prime them black because, well, we're going for a grim dark look here, right? Obviously though, I'm not gonna be painting all of these in quiet solitude alone with my thoughts because, you know, that would be hell. Luckily, this video is sponsored by Raycon, and as a result, I have my handy Raycon earbuds to accompany me on this stationary journey with their 8 hours of playtime, meaning that I can watch another entire rerun of the X-Files for the 17th time while I paint my Space Marines, and I don't even need to worry about any dangling wires getting in the way of my paintbrush. These bad boys are totally wireless and come with a huge selection of different colors, though I opted to match the Black Templars and every classy base rim out there with a cool black color scheme. Even better, Raycon started half the price of other premium audio brands, meaning that I can afford more plastic miniatures for my incalculably large pile of shame. Raycon have 3 different customizable sound profiles, but my favorite is the awareness mode feature, so that I can hear if anyone is trying to creep into my house in the dead of night while I paint an unreasonable amount of Space Marines in an arbitrary challenge. Pretty relatable, I think. Raycon offer a 30-day free return policy if you're not satisfied. So if you want to help support the channel and get some awesome wireless earbuds that let you listen to dubstep Gregorian chanting to help get you in the mood to play with some Space Marine miniatures, then click on the link in the description below or go to buyraycon.com/discourse miniatures to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. Thanks for sponsoring today's video, Raycon. And so I'm going to start on these models with some lead belcher. I'm dry brushing onto these by picking up paint with my rough brush here, wiping most of it off on some cloth, and then stroking the model with the remaining residue. This metallic sheen will simulate the armor of a knight, and it will make a great foundational color for the Iron Sovereigns. After all, their armor needs to be iron if they're the Iron Sovereigns, right? Next up, I'm going to take a different expendable brush and dry brush some white scar onto all the cloth, skin, and hair bits of the Space Marines. That's right, you haven't gone through a painting video without paying the slap chop toll, because that's what we're going to be doing with those portions of the models. The white scar dry brush will act as a highlight, catching onto all the edges for us, and that means when we add a contrast paint to it later, the recesses of the cloth will be darker and the edges will be brighter, providing a nice little bit of contrast on the model. There's actually a lot of cloth fabric on these Black Templar models, and that's great because we're going to slather it in the contrast paint Doomfire Magenta. Firstly, this is a lovely bright color that will contrast well against the darker armor. But secondly, this is a lore thing for me. I have all my Inquisition models painted in this same magenta, so I'm thematically tying the Iron Sovereigns into the Inquisition in my collection. And the reason for this is because in the lore, the Iron Sovereigns act as enforcers, interrogators, and ultimately executioners for the Inquisition. Unlike most other Space Marine chapters, the Iron Sovereigns worship the Emperor as a god and are feverishly devoted to that belief. See, I told you, we're getting the Grimdark in, right? Now, with the magenta painted on the tabard, I'm gonna go over some of the selected parts of the armor with the magenta too. And I'm trying to keep the consistency of the paint here slightly less thick so that the underlying metallic still shines through the contrast. This makes these portions of the Space Marines look like they were painted like bumper cars or dodgems if you're not from the 90s. And I'm not painting any of the areas of the Space Marines here in particular, just the odd shoulder pad or knee pad or weapon here and there. I'm randomizing this because firstly, it's funner to just keep things a little bit fresh, and also because it adds a bit of variation and visual points of interest on the models as individuals. See, I don't see these Space Marines as a unified army, so much as a series of different knights individually doing combat. These aren't soldiers, they're warriors. Or maybe more like thugs. Then we're gonna paint some of the little points of interest on the models, like these scrolls here. We're gonna hit these with the magenta as well at random, just to keep on reinforcing our primary colors. The scrolls that are embedded in the magenta though, we'll paint those white just to create a little bit of visual difference. And then we're gonna use Cygor Brown for some of the belts. Just some of the details there, and Retributor Gold for some bullets and for some other details, especially on the Marshal, because we want him to look a little bit more austere and dignified. And now we're going to get to the really fun bit. I love it whenever the painting and lore comes together perfectly. This is how creating a homebrew chapter can be a lot of fun, because you can add a lot of specific elements and be really imaginative and just let your imagination run wild. One of the homebrew lore elements of my chapter is that they have sworn not to clean their armor or weapons until all heresy in the galaxy has been purged. So, as you can imagine, this is gonna take a while. And because they travel from planet to planet to recruit the worst of the worst from juvenile prisons, they have plenty of neophytes in training, learning how to kill heretics the good old-fashioned way, with violence and blade. This is one of the elements of Warhammer that I really love, using homebrew to inform your paint scheme. In this way, your army can be built and painted in a way that is consistent with your roleplay vision of your army. It's unlike any other game. It's what I love about wargaming. from the beginning to the end, I want my paint scheme and my models to be informed by my own lore and homebrew. Now, I was in two minds about keeping the Neophyte armor cleaner than the Initiates and other Space Marines, but I decided that this armor would be passed on through the generations when the previous occupant unfortunately died, and therefore it has progressively gotten more stained and bloody as a result. So their armor is going to be just as bloody and grimy as all the others. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. We're going to start covering all of the Space Marine armor in dirt, grime, rust, and blood. Whew. So I'm gonna go over the armor here with bits of brass scorpion to represent rust that has formed on the armor throughout the centuries. This is a really awesome step because it's going to break up some of the monochrome lead belcher metallic color. A little trick here is to smudge the brass scorpion with your thumb. This will help it blend in and make it look a little bit grimier and dispersed. Perfect for a grimdark aesthetic. I'm adding this effect about randomly, but I'm also trying to hit the exhausts on the Space Marine backpacks. I'm trying to hit the muzzles on the guns to represent the effect of bolter fire, and I'm trying to hit around the legs and the joints to represent splotches of dirt and grime. I also like to throw on splotches of Cygor brown and rattling grime here as well, just to add to the look. Again, smudging these paints where it makes sense. All of this is going to make sure that the models look actually painted and not just primed with a bit of metallic. I love adding these types of details onto models because you can really individualize them. These holy paladins of injustice are starting to really look like the monsters that they are. Then I'm going to try and paint all of the cloth parts that aren't tabards, either Cygor brown or Black Legion black, depending on my mood. And I'm going to do the boots in the opposite color that I previously painted. So I'm going to paint Cygor brown boots to go with black pants, or black boots to go with the brown pants. And all of this is just to make sure that the models don't just blend into the terrain. Now, I'm going to use Guilliman flesh for the skin, and then when I'm painting the Neophyte hair, I'm going to go for some random, vibrant colors because it's the future. And people use hair dye in the future. There you are. Now I'm going to use some ink paint pens that I picked up in a local art store. And I'm going to use this pen to add some obscenities and random markings and declarations to the armor. You can kind of use these like a pen, but they do come out quite thick, so be careful with these. My Space Marines just so happen to be particularly unpleasant, and they want the galaxy to know that, hence all the graffiti. Once all of this paint is dry, we're gonna get to one of my favorite parts. We're gonna get to give our Space Marines their baptism of grimdark. This is dark tone wash from the Army Painter, and it's gonna make this color scheme come all together. Right now, our armor is too shiny, our rust too obvious, our grim too bright. We're gonna need to blend it all together by slathering dark tone all over the models. Oh yeah, nice and deep.
That's it, boy. Get in there nice and deep like.
I love this stuff. It really transforms Space Marines into grimdark Avengers of Darkness. Army Painter Darktone reminds me a lot of the old formulation for Nuln Oil. And just like Nuln Oil of old, it is liquid talent in a bottle. And if you're ever nervous about a paint job, or you've painted a model and you just don't think it looks very good, just remember to add some wash over the model and it will genuinely make the model look 10 times better. I love using Darktone over metallics and for darker colors, but if you have something like red armor, then red tone does a treat and green tone works for green paint, etc, etc. Just match them up. Honestly, this will help a model pop. Now we're gonna leave the dark tone to dry. Believe it or not, this is the longest part of the process of painting this scheme. And while we wait, we may as well move on to the vehicle. So this is the Impulsor. And we're gonna do exactly to this what we did to our Space Marine Infantry too, except, you know, more. Plus, we can fit some bigger, naughtier words on the Impulsor with our ink paint pens. Ooh, very naughty. There's something incredibly impetuous about this that I just love. This Impulsor is designed to bring Space Marines right into the heart of battle, and so therefore the opponents might have an actual opportunity to read some of this graffiti. Okay, and so we've done that, and the Space Marines are now dry, so we can add our finishing touches. I'm gonna use blood for the Blood God from Games Workshop to splatter blood all over the models. After all, being a Space Marine can be messy, especially if you don't clean your armor. I really love this part. There's just no such thing as too much blood. I'm going to make sure that I hit parts where I think the blood would splash if a chainsword had been recently used. And of course, I'm gonna get plenty of blood into the chainsword there as well. And then we're going to add some battle damage to the models by using a hobby knife to carefully slice dings into the armor. And really, that's us done. Just slap on some Astro Granite debris to the base, paint the rim black to finish, and then finally shade the Astro Granite with some Drakenhof Nightshade once it has dried in. And we're now completed. Our Iron Sovereigns are finished. That's a full combat patrol in a couple of hours, and honestly, waiting for the Dark Tome to dry and waiting for the Astro Granite debris was the longest bit. And okay, wow, what a trip. I think these have come out looking great, and they are very grimdark, like a 2009 first-person shooter. How about that for Call of Duty? My Iron Sovereigns are now ready to rip and tear across the galaxy, or at least a combat patrol of them is. I mean, I still have 2,000 points of Space Marines to paint now that I have the Leviathan models, but this is a start at least, and I know my scheme. I've got no more excuses to not get the rest of these Space Marines painted. I found painting these Space Marines a lot more fun than anticipated. This is actually my first time really painting a lot of Space Marines. They were a joy to paint, honestly. They have big, blocky parts, lots of armor. They're very toy-like. I can see why they were one of the original models made by Games Workshop when it came to creating their own Warhammer line. And I get why they're recommended to beginners. They're definitely a lot easier to paint than some other armies that I collect. So here you are then, the Iron Sovereigns, custodians, jailers, interrogators, executioners, and judges. Now the galaxy will bleed. And if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on the Combat Patrol game mode for Warhammer, check out this video here, unless it's not out yet, in which case, well, I'll give you my thoughts on 10th edition generally in that video. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more hobby content on the channel, then give this video a thumbs up so I know, or support me on Patreon at patreon.com/discoursminiatures for access to backstage Discord rooms where you can chat to me directly. And a huge thanks to my patrons, especially Sonic Bread, Crypto Kev, Mistress Arby, Novini, and Travis Hunter. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll catch y'all next time. Bye-bye!